Joining us with more on the regional developments with Iran is Dr. Martin Sherman, the founder and executive director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Now, 40 years have passed since the Iranian Revolution. And after 40 years, why is Iran still so bent on destroying Israel?
Well, it's part of its political DNA, the Islamic Revolution, something that they want to export. And a non-Islamic entity on what they say is Islamic land is an anathema to them which they cannot tolerate. It's not necessarily in the DNA of the Iranian people, because before the revolution, there were very close ties between Israel and Iran. El Al flights were landing regularly and frequently. The Israeli companies were constructing there. So it's a function of the regime more than the function of the country, I think.
How much of the country do you think is actually buying into that ideology, however? Because after 40 years, we have to imagine that some people are saying, yeah, death to Israel, whatever.
Well, I don't think any reliable public opinion polls are conducted there, but there certainly has been a lot of resistance. There have been signs saying, no to Palestine, no to investments in Syria, etc., and focus on the domestic scene. And there's a lot to focus on the domestic scene. The GDP is shrinking. I think the GDP in 2020 is going to be the same as about the GDP in 2015, which means it's retreated 5 years in terms of GDP, whilst the population has been growing. Prices are high. There's a shortage of merchandise. The currency is devalued by almost 60% over the last year, although it's rallied a little bit in November. I'm not quite sure why. Maybe because of perceived weakness of the Trump administration, when you saw he didn't respond to the attack in Saudi Arabia. Housing prices are going through the roof because of the high inflation. People want to hold, things other than money.
Right.
There's a huge water crisis there, which is going to apparently displace tens of millions of people in the coming decade. So there's a lot to concentrate on the domestic front.
On the domestic front, yeah, we're seeing these protests in Lebanon, and the Iranians seem to be very, very concerned about this. Why are they so worried?
Well, I mean, the uprising against the existing order there means, among other things, opposition to Hezbollah, which is the Iranian agent of influence in Lebanon. And if there's going to be a protest against the existing order, it's going to be a protest against the Hezbollah, and therefore a protest against the Iranian influence there.
Given all the crises, again, that you were referring to within Iran, is Tehran maybe worried that the protests will be exported from Lebanon and Iraq into Iran?
Well, that there will be another Arab Spring of sorts.
Perhaps, but I think there are enough reasons to worry about protests in Iran, even without Lebanon. The question is, I think a lot depends on how the U.S. is viewed as well, because basically there are two questions about Trump: whether he'll be re-elected, or some Democrat who's going to be soft on Iran will be elected, and whether he actually has the resolve to fight, because it doesn't seem that he really has lately. Because, as I said before, he didn't respond to the attack in Saudi Arabia. He didn't respond to the shooting down of the U.S. drone. So maybe this has emboldened the Iranians a little bit. Now they feel they can be a bit more bellicose than they could have been before.
Did the withdrawal from Syria also embolden Iran in your opinion?
I'm sure there wasn't much deterrence in it. So Trump may be being perceived as perhaps less daunting than he was perceived before these moves.
Right. Now, speaking of the recent tensions in Gaza, how is Iran involved in these tensions, if at all?
Well, the rumors are that it's financing them. It's financing, even though they're Sunnis, the Islamic Jihad and the Hamas are rumored to be...
Do you think they're orchestrating the attacks, though? That they have like a real hand in the planning, maybe even as a divergence from the north?
I'm not sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if that is the case. But the fact is that they, Hamas and the Jihad know how to plan themselves. I don't think they really need the Iranians to egg them on. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's some Iranian input into it. But the problem with Gaza is, as I said before, what are you going to do about it? And I think people are trying to ignore the ugly truth and the hard facts, because, as I've said before in a few programs, in the long run, there are either going to be Arabs in Gaza or Jews in the Negev, but there won't be both.
All right. Well, Martin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.